Yes, welcome into the camp. Day 3 in the books for fall camp for the Badgers down in Platteville. They are half week into it here, Jesse. They were on the field again Thursday morning for about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. And we were there. We're going to break it all down. Ton to get to. It, again, is still very, very early, but shoulder pads went on. So we got some one-on-ones, offensive line, defensive line, where you could actually see something happen. And James Thompson made something happen. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the quarterbacks and where Braden Locke and Tyler Van Dyke stand, and maybe some of the young guys standing out that potentially make plays this year for the Badgers. One on offense, one on defense. I know we talked about the one on offense yesterday, and maybe we'll talk about them again today. That's just what Darian Dupree is going to force us to do. But where do you want to start? Do you want to? I kind of want to start with the defensive line, because we got to talk to the defensive line today. And I wanted to kind of talk about that competition period at the beginning of practice. So I think we've talked about this. This was the one-on-ones that we saw yesterday with Darian Dupree beating Jaheim Thomas, and it's kind of what we were talking about. This time around, because shoulder pads went on, they went one-on-one, defensive line versus offensive line. And I think maybe some of the outside linebackers may have been involved as well. I couldn't see it great from where I was at, but I saw a video of it afterwards. And James Thompson Jr. put Joe Huber on his back with a nice bull rush. And I asked James Thompson Jr. after practice, is it nice? Is it nice at the first one of the year? And he's like, oh yeah. Like, he had a big smile on his face. And he actually said that he had told defensive line coach E.J. Whitlow, watch this. And he went and put Joe Huber on his back, got the entire practice going with oohs and ahs, and it was a good start. He is exactly that. That's exactly the type of play that they're going to need from James Thompson Jr. on a more regular basis, a guy that is going to create what was talked about last year as chaos, create chaos for the offensive line. That's what they wanted from the defensive line. Didn't happen nearly enough last year, though. In talking to Ben Barton, he kind of took a little bit of offense, apparently, to some of those questions that were asked today. I don't know. You were the one that asking him. Maybe you took that differently. But either way, James Thompson Jr., the way that started out and the way that the defense line has to play, it's a nice sign.
Yeah, it's good to get the juice going early, and those one-on-one situations are not going to be obviously what it looks like in a game, but you want to show that you can be a playmaker. And we know that of that group, Thompson is the one who has proven it on the field, the only guy returning that had more than one sack last season. The question is, who else is going to help him? And I asked Ben Barton, among other questions, just on the outside. I like you got to preface it with that. But it seems like the biggest question mark is defensive line among the defense.
Just before we get any further into this, yes, that is a pro tip from veteran reporter Jesse Temple. You don't say, I was thinking this, or we were talking about this from the outside.
Correct.
People are saying, you don't come through with what you were actually thinking, even though maybe you were part of that outside thought group that was thinking that type of stuff.
Yes. I always joke about this with people, the ridiculous question to ask of athletes or other people in different forums of, what do you say to those who say? Anyway, yeah, I mean, but let's be real. That's the one position group on defense that we're just not sure what kind of productivity there's going to be. And you made a comment about all people do is look at TFL, sacks, tackles, and they're looking at production. And I guess my response was, yeah. I mean, that is kind of important. But obviously, defensive linemen are responsible for doing a lot more than that. You're springing other people. The hope, and they're all saying the right things, is that they have more depth, that they have more people capable of being contributors. And Luke Fickell has said this season, much as he did last season, that they want to have 6 players that they can rotate. And when Barton was talking about the conversations they had with him, it was going and looking at the snap counts. James Thompson Jr. is playing a lot of snaps. Gio Paez playing a lot of snaps. Rodas Johnson. And the message was, we can't do that this season. We need a little bit better distribution. And what they've done so far is pretty much what we expected with the guys that were coming back. You knew that Kurt Neal, James Thompson Jr. were were the kind of the go-to guys up front. Ben Barton gets in there with the first team, especially in run situations. And with the twos, we've seen Cade McDonald and the two transfers, Elijah Hills and Brandon Lane. And some of those guys are going to have to be more consistent and make more of an impact. I'm not going to sit here and say that we've got a definitive answer just because everybody says, oh, we've been in the scheme for a year. We understand it better. I'm not thinking as much. I'm just reacting. And we have these new added transfers who are going to be playmakers. We wondered about this last year. They brought Darian Varner in from Temple. He was an all-conference performer, and he barely played, and he left, and now he's at Cincinnati. So there have been a handful of plays from that group. Barton had a nice play today, a stop on Ches Malusi. So they're capable of it, but will we be able to see it consistently enough to feel like it's substantially different from a year ago? That's my question, and it remains to be seen.
Yeah. I've deemed this period of time, everyone says the right things. Because
Yes.
that's what, I mean, everyone says the right thing at this point. It's not until you find a little adversity like they did last year after that losing streak where people come out and start saying the things that need to be said as opposed to saying the right things. But Ben Barton was adamant about the fact that he thinks that this group is underrated. And I don't know if he would use the word disrespected. He didn't use the word disrespected, but that's kind of how I took, maybe his tone a little bit was they felt disrespected, and that guys like Kurt Neal and James Thompson and Elijah Hills are guys that can make plays and will make plays. And again, we'll see if that ends up being the case. James Thompson Jr., there's no doubt about it. We talked about it. I know we talked about it during the first part of the last season because he was making plays. He was creating chaos. You think back to the Washington State game. He had a really good game out there. And, and didn't he finish like second in sacks last year? He had like 3.5 sacks, and that was they didn't have a lot of sacks last year, if we're being fair. But he is a proven playmaker. It's just, can he do it on a more consistent basis? And can you get help from other people along the line as well? And that's a huge question.
Well, the other part to this too is, I think we've talked about this before. Go back over the years, and how many years can you say that Wisconsin's defensive line was consistently productive? And I mean, there were a handful of years. I think of the one without James, Connor Sheehy, Chikwe Obasi. They had a very good year from a productivity standpoint. But I think they have an opportunity to, with their play, free up those outside linebackers. And again, I don't expect 6 sacks for multiple defensive linemen this year, but maybe that allows 6+ sacks for some of these outside linebackers in a way that we didn't see last year. It feels like, again, those outside linebackers have some studs, some edge rushers in the mold of like a Nick Herbig, and obviously some of the other outside linebackers we've seen over the last decade. So that's going to be part of the responsibility here too, is if you're not making the play, then make sure you allow the other guy to make that play.
Yeah. Again, the idea of back then in that scheme, the way that they did things, it was not about making plays for the defensive line, was it? It was about freeing guys up, the inside linebackers, to go and make all the tackles. That's essentially what they were asking for the most part, asking in that 3-4 scheme under Jim Leonard, under, Wilcox, under Dave Arena. For the most part, that was not what they were being asked to do. That has changed, obviously. We've heard that. Now it actually has to come to fruition. And you're right. They say that they went out and got guys that fit this now, right? And guys that now know the playbook on the back of their hands and all that good stuff. But again, it is say all the right thing time, and we'll have to see if it ends up coming all together for that group. The one thing I will say is, Ernest Willer is a guy that I think has a big future at Wisconsin. I don't know that it's going to be this year, but you in talking to those guys, he was certainly mentioned among them. The one guy that was not mentioned at all though today was Jamel Howard. And I don't know, maybe that's a mess up on our part for not asking, or I should say a mess up on my part for not asking, but he was a guy that came in. I mean, Greg Scruggs really, really thought very, very highly of him, and they went after him hard, and he was a late add to that 2023 class. I think he was one of the only ones that signed in February, right? Like he was one of the few ones that signed late in that class. And it just hasn't, yet. Again, this is only his second fall camp, but I don't know that he's even in the talk for playing time at this point.
Yeah, I would say part of it is probably our fault for not asking specifically about Jamel, because I will say, I think this might have even been at Wednesday's practice. He had a pair of pass breakups at the line of scrimmage. So he is on the field. He's made at least some impact in the third team reps that he's gotten. I think last fall, I want to say he got hurt pretty early too. And so that didn't help the cause, but there seems to be a clear delineation between the veterans and the younger guys. And that's not the worst thing in the world. I'm very high on the young talent that they have, including Jamel Howard, certainly Dylan Johnson, Ernest Willer as well, and Hank Weber is the other freshman that's on the roster right now, the scholarship group. So there's talent there, but defensive line, like a lot of positions, you don't necessarily expect those guys to be on the field right away. It takes a very special situation, a Keanu Benton type of situation. Dylan Johnson is the one that I certainly wonder about what the ceiling could be for him, and he's only 3 practices in. But I think if you're looking at the 6 guys that could contribute, it's the 6 we mentioned off the top, where you've got the 4 returners and then the 2 transfer guys.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, let's stay on defense for today. Ricardo Hallman, he is obviously the returning. I mean, he's a third-team All-American, according to the Associated Press. He led the Big Ten and led the country in interceptions last year with 7. It was tied for the most by a Wisconsin corner in school history. So he had a hell of a season last year. We didn't get to see him at all in the spring as he was recovering from shoulder surgery. I think Luke Fickell may have mentioned this when we were down at Big Ten Media Days, that maybe if he didn't have that surgery, he might have gone to the NFL, that he might have tried to pursue that a little bit more. Maybe that was one of the reasons why he decided to return. I know he talked on Media Day as well a little bit about that, but he was back in form today. They tested him a couple times, and he was right up for the task. There was a ball. Trying to remember, I don't remember which quarterback it was. I think it was Braden Locke trying to force one over, not force one, but go deep, and it looked like he had him. And all of a sudden, Ricardo Hallman came, and the coverage was really, really good. He knocked the ball away, and he talks. I love that aspect of Ricardo Hallman. I remember you go back to Minnesota last year where he broke up a 4th down pass in the end zone, and he was turned around to the student section at Minnesota and was giving him the business. I love that about him, but his play is just at a very, very high level. And it is, I like guys that play like that, but I also like guys that it didn't necessarily come right away for him. And it didn't come right away for him, right? Like, he didn't play as a true freshman very much. He gets forced into it as a redshirt freshman in 22, and he had some moments. And then he goes down to Michigan State, and Jaden Reed happened, and that end of that game happened, and yet he was there that next Monday talking to us, owning absolutely everything about what happened in that game, even though he was crushed and he was crying. But he has bounced back as well as anybody I can think of, from a low spot to where he was last year and to where he is right now.
Practice Thursday was a reminder of who he was last season and what he's capable of being this season. You're right. He was in on multiple passes down the field. And what was interesting about the one you're talking about is it came immediately after a play that's now on Wisconsin's official football Twitter account, where there was a pass thrown into the left flat to Tawee Walker, who I know we'll talk about as well. And Hallman was right there, and Walker turned upfield at the exact time that he just blew Hallman's helmet right off. So then the very next play, they test Hallman down the field. It was a pass to Quincy Burrows, and Hallman played really good coverage and forced the incompletion. And then Hallman obviously started talking away, but it wasn't the only big play that he made. So it wasn't necessarily coming up with an interception or even a PBU. It's just being in the area and playing such tight coverage that the receiver doesn't have a legitimate chance to catch the pass. And so I think obviously that secondary, that top group, you feel pretty good about at this point and going into the season, because now Hallman is healthy. Nazir Forkurine had a tremendous spring, and coaches have obviously talked about him and the growth and progress he's made since a year ago when he couldn't even lift weights and was very underweight. And you've got Max Lofi in the slot, and obviously the safeties and Wohler and Brown and Latu when he gets his opportunities, and even Preston Zachman. But Hallman is certainly one of those leaders and ready for another big season.
Not the only DB with a big day either, right? Jace Arnold kind of turned some heads.
He did. And he and Jonas DeClona have kind of gone back and forth because they both came in together. They were both early enrollees who play cornerback. And last season, DeClona kind of got the opportunities in the game with the few that he did get. But Arnold is right there, and the kinds of plays that he's able to make, especially on a day like today, show what the upward trajectory is for him. It's good for Wisconsin because they've got the depth. It's just that how many opportunities are there going to be when you've got Hallman out there who's you want him on the field for every snap if he's healthy enough. And Forkerine is playing at that level as well, but they have some really good talent in the younger groups at cornerback, and Arnold is one of them.
I mean, they have a ton of talent in that young group. It's like, who's going to – what's up?
Amari
Snowden as well. Amari Snowden had an interception today in a drill. So, yeah, I mean, they have a ton of young talent there. I'm just anxious to see who's going to step into those roles that are going to be likely available after this year, right? I mean, Max Lofi's a senior, and obviously he's in the slot, but he's in his last year. Nizer Forkerine's in his last year. Ricardo Hallman, if he plays to the standard that he set last year, is in his last year. So you have, and there's a reason why they've been throwing, and RJ Delancey, obviously in his last year, there's a reason they've been throwing so many scholarships at guys, is they're going to have opportunities. And a lot of these guys are really, really talented. I'm so interested to see which ones actually elevate to put themselves in position to, maybe it's not this year, right? But into next year, like, who is going to be the next guy? Ricardo Hallman's the guy right now. Nizer Forkerine is another guy at this time. Who's going to be the next ones to step up? And of all those guys, I don't know that I would have a favorite at this point. I think they're all kind of have all had their moments.
Yeah, certainly DeClona and Arnold to me feel like they're sort of neck and neck or very close in terms of the opportunities that they've received. Amari Snowden has had more of those kind of third team reps, but you look at the length. I mean, you loved it coming out of high school. Just guy who's a left-handed pitcher who gave up baseball, could throw in the high 80s, and yet he had so much trust in Luke Fickell that he decided to pursue football at a school that doesn't even offer baseball, which is a conversation for another day. So
you just upset a lot of people.
I did. And then obviously the corners that they brought in this class, who we really haven't talked about because we haven't had a chance to see them very much. The young guy periods are kind of few and far between. I mean, yes, there's been 13 reps, but there are so many corners in that room that you want to give other guys opportunities. But I mean, Emilio Agard was a big time get from Philadelphia, and obviously Xavier Lucas, for them to pull him out of Florida was a big deal. So there is a lot to like about that cornerback group, even if you don't see a lot of them this season.
I think Xavier Lucas is probably next. I mean, I guess I was referring to guys that had been here, but if you throw in the guys that just showed up, Xavier Lucas is probably at the top of that list just because of how physically imposing he is at that size. And we saw how fast he can run. And we know what guys have said about him. So he has been getting some of those third team reps opposite Snowden would that be the biggest corner duo in the country? 6'4", and almost 6'2".
What you need to do is then throw Raphael Dunn in there at safety because he's 6'4". We've seen him get a handful of those kind of younger guys reps. Just absurd, the length back there.
And then Remington Moss coming in next year. Another guy who's he's like 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". No, he's like a 6'3" guy, isn't he? They have some size. And that is find you somebody that loves you the way Luke Fickell loves guys with height of being 6'1" or taller.
Length and athleticism.
Yeah, that's what they want. And I shouldn't even say Luke Fickell. I should just say the entire Wisconsin recruiting staff. You guys know who I'm talking about. All right, so Ricardo Hallman stood out. I thought Jace Arnold stood out. Thomas Heiberger also getting more reps with the number two defense, and he's going to have his moments where he gets. I mean, if we're being fair, he's going to have his moments where he gets overwhelmed with some of the size that is along the offensive line, but his quickness, and he's a big guy too, right? He's 6'4". He's going to continue to grow and get bigger, but his size, his quickness, and his length is just a huge, huge problem, I think, on the edge as well. And he's a guy because of, they don't have a ton of depth after the top 3 or 4, right? We know Leon Lowry, and we know Daryl Peterson. We know John Pius, Aaron Witt coming off that injury. And then what? It's Thomas Heiberger right now, isn't it?
It absolutely is. What's so interesting about Heiberger is he's such a different body type from everybody else that's the veteran guys in that top two from the spring. Is Lowry's listed at 252 pounds. Pius is 250 pounds. Peterson's 248 pounds. Witt, obviously, another very big body. And here comes Heiberger, who's listed at 227 pounds, which is actually up 9 pounds from the spring when he was an early enrollee. You would expect that. And yet, he's able to hold his own against some pretty big offensive linemen. He just does it in a different way, which, if we're talking about in the secondary, that idea of length and athleticism is the future. It is the next wave of Wisconsin football defensively, because they really talked Heiberger up on signing day about how he was kind of the ideal prospect, or the type of player that they were looking for, who's that hybrid mold, who could do a lot of different things. And he made multiple stops today. A couple of them were in the run game that stand out. There was one where, and I don't know if this was a play breakdown, I can't imagine it was designed quarterback draw for Braden Locke, but Locke found himself just standing in the pocket and no one was around, and Heiberger shot right up the middle and had a would-be sack, since obviously you can't touch the quarterback or a melee would break out. But I just continue to be so impressed by Heiberger, and we saw a little bit of this in the spring as well. But you're right, there's not a lot of scholarship bodies in the outside linebacker room to begin with. I think they had 6 in the spring when you throw in Anello Lufale, and both he and Heiberger were true freshmen early enrollees. But Heiberger certainly seems like the next man up. And I don't know what kind of defensive opportunities he's going to get when you consider the talent they have off the edge with the transfers they have. And obviously Daryl Peterson put together a really good season a year ago. But at minimum, you would have to think he's going to be a special teams contributor. And maybe you figure out a way to get him on the field in the same way that they did with Christian Allegro a year ago. I would be very surprised if he ends up redshirting this year. Like, I think there are a handful of true freshmen that you just feel like, got to figure out a way to get them on the field in some capacity, because they continue to make an impact.
Well, and what have we heard from Luke Fickell and from Mike Tressel about all the plays that CJ Getz had to take under last year, right? They want to be able to rotate guys at outside linebacker. And if a guy is ready, like last year, they didn't feel like there were other guys ready to play, that they didn't deserve to be on the field. And CJ Getz did, even though he had lost like 20 pounds in the season, or 15, 20 pounds in the season. He deserved to be on the field more so than throwing another guy in there for 2 plays. It didn't make sense. Do they have enough behind them to be okay with taking a Leon Lowry or John Pius or Daryl Peterson off the field? Do they feel comfortable enough with the Thomas Heiberger to put him on the field? And does he deserve to be on there? And is he going to hold up? And is he all those things? And it feels like days into practice, but we also had 15 days of practice to watch back in the spring, that he is a guy that could be that, assuming he's able to continue on that upward trajectory that we've seen from him so far here in fall camp. All right, let's go to the other side of the ball. Let's talk a little bit of quarterbacks. Not a ton of big plays again for the offense for a variety of reasons. I don't think that they have really tried to push the ball down the field at times, and at other times they have, and there have been some good plays from the defense and maybe some throws that each guy would like to have back. But I think you said before we came on, you thought today was Braden Locke's best day.
Well, it's only been 3 practices, so it's obviously a small sample size. I think day 2 and day 3 have been better from Braden. The thing is, I think people listening want maybe a more in-depth, detailed evaluation of the quarterback play, and that's very challenging when you have an opportunity to see in person the kinds of things that they're doing right now, because you're right, they're not taking a lot of shots down the field. They're not doing any move the ball situations. A lot of the pass plays that they're throwing are kind of short plays, get someone into space, and they're obviously working on specific things right now. But you've seen a handful of good plays from each guy and a handful that they wanted back. They just continue to rotate first and second team offense. So that's another piece of this too, is the continuity of it all and who's around you. But yeah, I mean, Locke put together some really good throws. He had a nice throw down the right sideline that Riley Nowakowski laid out for a big gain. The longest pass play that he had really had nothing to do with him and everything to do with Tretch Kekahuna. He threw one into the left flat, and Kekahuna just Kekahunaed, man. He blew past a defender. He was on the left sideline, and he cut back across the field a little bit and was able to pick up at least 30-plus yards. So that's going to make a quarterback look good. I think the good news for Wisconsin is the last 2 days, the mistakes have been significantly tamped down after day 1 when there were way too many fumbles. But I mean, my sense is they're going to continue to rotate this week. I wonder if they'll continue to rotate in some capacity, at least at the start of week 2. And then by the end of week 2, and certainly going into week 3, I think we'll have a more firm understanding, because you have to have one guy just go with the ones and one guy just go with the twos. With Tyler Van Dyke, you don't think so? You think they'll keep rotating for 3 weeks?
Well, I don't know. We were told that anybody at practice would go, right? Like, we're going to know based on what we've seen that which quarterback is going to be. I don't know that I get 3 practice. One guy say, oh yeah, this is the way that it's going to go, even though I think we're both still expect Tyler Van Dyke to be the starter. I don't think that either one has separated to a different level or fallen off. I think they're both still going along.
Yeah, I think that is a fair assessment. There hasn't been a standout guy yet. There just are these moments. There's moments where Tyler...
I was going to say this feels almost exactly like it did in spring, where it was kind of, it was fine. It's just, And then Tyler Van Dyke in the last half of spring just turned it on. And all of a sudden things were going at a lot better level. So maybe that's because that's very similar. They're in a very similar spot, at least again, I don't know this to be absolute fact, just based on the way we talked to Phil Longo last year. The first half of spring was install, right? And then second half is a little bit more. Same, they install it again during fall camp, and now they had the opportunity to do that a little bit more with OTAs. And so it might be a little bit different. I don't know how long the install period would last during fall camp, but this still, based on what we've seen so far, still feels very install-ish. And so once we get to the end of this, all of a sudden, maybe one of them jumps off like we saw in spring.
Yeah. And I think it just obviously comes down to consistency. Whoever's going to win the starting job, there are these moments where Tyler might misfire on a throw, underthrew Riley Nowakowski down the field, or might throw behind someone. But and I said this the other day, there's like one play a day where you go, oh, okay. And it happened again today. He makes a throw. It's an absolute rope to CJ Williams over the middle between multiple defenders for a first down. And then there's also at least one play a day where something breaks down, or it's a design, and he's able to pull the ball and he gets a big gain, because that's something he's capable of doing. And those are the moments that you want to be able to see more of if you're Wisconsin to feel confident moving forward. But yeah, you're right. It's still so early in this process. And we're talking on the first day of August. The first game isn't for 29 days, and they don't close practices off to us, at least as of now, for another 2+ weeks. So that is a ton of opportunity for them to try and separate themselves.
I was mad that underthrow to Riley Nowakowski, the next play was a dart to Bryson Green over the middle, from Van Dyke. So it happens, and you just have to, a little bit more consistency. But in terms of standouts, you mentioned Trechka Kahuna. That play obviously stands out, right? He just made a move on Austin Brown and woo, was gone. And I thought Bryson Green had a solid day. Jackson Aker being used as a bit of when they go to their 2 running back sets, getting some work. He was a fullback a couple of years ago. He's able to use some of that to his advantage, leading the way. Again, Tyree Walker, fantastic again. I continue to say that. I think he just seems to find the little gaps in a hole and be able to burst through it with bursts that before I saw him in spring, I didn't know he had. And it just feels like on a regular basis, he has become someone that's going to be able to find those and break off big runs. I think you would agree with that.
The way I put it in my recap off today is that he is playing of starter quality. The good news for Wisconsin is that Chez Mellusi is there as well. And so I know there are a lot of other talented running backs, but it seems difficult to believe that someone's going to leapfrog those top 2 guys. And I'm sure we'll get into that conversation as well. But to me, Walker really, first of all, it feels like he's going to be one of the most impactful offseason transfer additions that they have. And there are obviously some other guys in there who are going to make a significant impact, but he really has picked up where he left off in the spring. Because that was a question mark, is did they just get him as a stopgap because he's got 1 year left and you're bringing in these 3 freshman running backs and Chez Mellusi is injury prone? And it's clearly more than that, which feels like perhaps a surprise to some people, but he has had a couple, and this happened today as well, a couple plays where he just breaks free and gets 10 plus yards and gets ahead of steam. And certainly it helps to have good blocking, but he's able to lower his shoulder. I talked about the play where he caught the pass in the flat and knocked off the helmet of Ricardo Hallman. So he's got a lot of different skill sets, and that's got to be encouraging for Wisconsin, which now has more depth at running back. Of course, you got to stay healthy.
That's the big thing, staying healthy. Can they stay healthy? I look at some of the other guys that have made plays. Dylan Jones today, the spin move that he had was just in a team drill, pretty. And a guy who I guess technically is like 6th or 7th on the depth chart, be able to make that move, they have an embarrassment of riches. And the guy that you would technically say is below him on the depth chart continues to make some nice plays, and then also have, maybe some freshman moments as well in Darian Dupree.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say. I mean, I think they kind of rotate who gets the first
whatever
reps with the third team, but
whatever. It's irrelevant. It is relevant. I don't know why I even mentioned it. It's irrelevant. But like, just in terms of like, when you look at it, Ches Malusi,
yeah,
Tawee Walker, Cade Yakimelli, Jackson Aker. Then it goes, I mean, you could even Bortolotti's getting some reps with that second group. And then with the threes, it is the 3 true freshmen with Gideon Atuka, who had a really nice long run today, Dylan Jones and Darian Dupree. I mean, they do certainly have tiers, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe I was just misunderstanding. Like, I don't think any of the freshmen right now, like Jones or Dupree, it's give them a shot and see what they got. But I mean,
I don't know why I don't know why I said depth chart.
Obviously both those guys have a ton of talent, and Dupree, every time he touches a ball, it's just, I think something's going to happen. He had a couple of those plays today too. One, Atuka sprung him for a pretty nice run, and there was another one that, frankly, is defensive breakdown. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he ran around the right side and no one touched him for at least 15 yards. But you give him the ball into open space and he can make something happen. The thing is, what's the best case scenario for Wisconsin right now? I mean, do you want him to play in some capacity? No,
yes.
But what does that look like?
Because
healthy.
If he's playing, it's either because of injury, which is what you don't want, right? Or it's because he's just too good to keep off the field.
Yeah.
And if he's too good to keep off the field, that's a plus. I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and say that's a bad thing. Find a way to get the ball in his hands. You said it yesterday. He's the guy that you want to find a way to get the ball in his hands. We saw it a little bit today. They were working on kickoff. Could he be a potential as a kickoff returner? I think Vinny Anthony is probably still your number one guy back there at this point, but we saw him getting some work. I think that's a possibility. It is not a problem if Darian Dupree is so good that he has to be on the field.
Yeah.
So if he's that good and he deserves, or we see it, and he somehow deserves to be on the field more than Tawee Walker or Ches Malusi down the line, I'm not saying game 1 or game 2, but down the line, that's not a bad thing for Wisconsin. And these guys came here to play. Like, I don't think you want to be having him sit on the bench this year.
I mean, I'm certainly interested to see how it unfolds, because the talent is there, and it feels like it's one of those guys just too talented to keep off the field. Is a good problem to have, but you got to figure out how to utilize him. And obviously, they had a lot of different guys that they were looking at in kick returners. They had multiple groups, one guy on one side, one guy on the other. Dylan Jones was in there as well, and certainly you've got Vinny Anthony, Tretch Kahuna, who had a couple kick returns last year, including a big one against LSU, and Tyrell Henry, who has certainly a success as a kick returner at Michigan State and punt returner. So they got some options and have tried to upgrade the talent for year 2.
I think they have. Would you agree? at running back.
Will it translate to more wins? Well, we'll find out.
See, but that's not fair. Like, there's more talent there. I don't think we can argue any other way. There's definitely, is there more talent on this team now than there was last year? Team-wide.
Yeah. Yes. But it's always a but. It just is, frankly. Nobody cares if you have more talent, but you go 7-5 or 8-4. Although this year that would feel 8 wins, so 9 wins would feel like some type of progress. it's a long game. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, it's just not a quick fix. So you build the talent, it gets better this year. The hope with the program is that it gets better the year after that, to a point where you're not only consistently competitive, but starting to win some of these games. So we'll find out.
We'll be there, and then we'll be back to talk about it Friday afternoon. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.